Good day and welcome back to another DBZ Dokkan Battle video. In this video we're going to talk about how to build your units with skill orbs and the hidden potential system, and basically all the considerations you need to make in a bit of a more advanced, in-depth guide, more so than say my previous guide, which is more of a basic guide. So I will leave that one in the top right hand corner. But I really want to talk today about building a unit from scratch. The example we'll use is this AGL pan. But we need to start with the basics a little bit first for those who are watching this for the first time. So you have crit, you have additional attack, you have evasion, you have type attack boost, you have type defense boost, you have super attack, level boost, and you also obviously have recovery boost. So the way they all work is pretty simple. Each level you get in each one, for the most part, increases them by 1%. Evasion increases at 1%, crit increases at 2%, and combo attack increases at 2% for a normal additional, but 1% for a super attack. Combo attack, crit, and evasion are your three most important. Combo attack, as I mentioned before, 2% for every level, 1% for a chance at supering. Then crit is 2% for every level. So if you have 10 crit, you have a 20% chance to crit. This is all separate to your hidden potential system. And then you have the evasion. And evasion goes at 1% for one level. All three items or mechanics proc separate to passives. So for example, if I have a 60% chance to crit, I don't add the 20% from my passive. I have 60% chance to crit, and then if that doesn't proc, I have a 20% chance to proc when it doesn't proc. So it's a little bit different in the effective maths. It reduces it slightly. So you basically have a 20% chance or 40% to crit, meaning you have 70% total effective chance. It's not too important, but it's just important to note. When you are building your character, it's important as well that you know that each typing has a baseline hidden potential passive. So even at 55%, AGL and physical units get an additional, strength and tech units get crit, and int units get dodge. What's also important to note when you are building your characters is that you always unlock the bottom right and the top left hand side paths, as these contain your selection nodes that make the biggest impact. They will give you your crit, evasion, and dodge nodes, as well as the most stats overall for your character. So the bottom right hand path is the most important, and then you have the top left, and you can choose between top right or bottom left. Doesn't really matter, really ultimately at the end of the day. Both give a decent amount of stats and a little bit of a selection. We'll talk about super attack boost and type defense boost and when you should choose those. But for the most part, you will never really choose those or use equipment for those generally. But you can, of course. So obviously we have to have Pan at 10 super attack level to be able to access our bottom right hand path. So we're just doing that. And then before we build Pan, we have to read through Pan's passive and understand her as a card before we can talk about anything else. But before we get there, the last thing I want to mention is stats. So as you can see, when we fully activate all of Pan's nodes, we get around 3,000 in the stats. Generally speaking, most normal units will have about 5,000 for these. That's called an A-tier stat system. It's the most common stat system, and it's the one that is prevalent for most units. The distribution changes slightly depending on whether they're strength, AGL, tech, etc., but it doesn't change too much. When you are looking at A-tier units like this Int Gogeta, for example, they have around this amount of stats. If you look at Janemba, however, he has an old S-tier system, which has 7,000. However, this system is no longer in use. So the most times you will see is either the free-to-play stat distribution, which is what Pan has, or the normal standard A-tier system, which is the 5,000, that you will see for most other units, including free-to-play LRs, which is one of the giveaways. when we look at Pan, and before we build Pan, we have to look at her passive. Now, there's two important things to always consider when you're building a unit. What do they have in their passive? And then what do I want to give them or augment? So looking at Pan, Pan has 50% dodge. She has guaranteed crits in the first slot. If she's in the second or third slot, she has a guaranteed additional. In the first slot, she has a great chance at additional. So Pan as a unit effectively has quite a decent rate of evasion already. She has additionals unconditional of whether she is in the first, second, or third slot, just the percentage changes, and she has even guaranteed crit in the first slot. To maximize the most out of Pan, I have to assess what her passive procs off of. Well, the best component of her passive is her being in the first slot. Not only does it give her guaranteed crits, but it also gives her a chance to let additionals, and we still have the bonus evasion from the 20% before she's attacked, which gives her an effective 70%, which means as a first slot tank, based solely on evasion, Pan could be useful. Of course, you are gambling because you're gambling on Pan evading, but I like to play with a more aggressive offensive style. Pan doesn't support either, so she's more just traditionally a RNG based tank. She doesn't provide support. You don't really want to float her. There's no point in floating her. Her damage is tied to her being in the first slot. So for me, functionally, the best way to build her is to maximize what she does well. And what she does well is evasion. A counterpoint to this is Gloria. Gloria's passive is built almost entirely of additionals. His passive features an insane amount of additionals. He procs a lot of his whole passive off of additionals. He procs additional supers off of additionals. He procs more attacks off of additionals. He builds himself up off of additionals. But he has almost nothing else. He has evasion, yes, which builds up off of his additionals at a super high rate. So he's missing an offensive mechanic, crit. You can give him evasion, you can give him additionals, and make him fully defensive. I like to give him crit, because I want to maximize his offensive capabilities. I don't believe all units are meant to last forever defensively, so I like to maximize them offensively, as offense is how I like to win events, more so than defense. But now back to Pan. So for Pan, with such a good level of evasion, with built-in additionals regardless of her position, even a great chance or high chance of additional is still very, very good. And with the fact that she will have guaranteed crits, I feel the need to build her, maximizing her defensive potential from an evasion standpoint. So with Pan, what I like to do is I'm going to go and build her with evasion as her priority. Remember, all hidden potential system selections proc separate to passives. So for example, me having additional evasion isn't going to make Pan have 96% evasion. Doesn't quite work like that. What it's going to do is if I give her more evasion, it's going to be an additional proc that could occur when my evasion from her passive fails. And because of this, it means that, for example, her 70% she has effective before being attacked, I'm going to get, when I'm done with my build, 26% evasion on the times where she doesn't evade. So effectively speaking, we're talking around about 78% effective pre-attack evasion. You'll also note that at times you'll have to choose between type defense boost and recovery boost, and type attack boost and super attack boost. If a unit crits, technically super attack boost is best. If a unit has type effective or effective against all types, then type attack boost is best. If a unit guards, type defense boost is best. If a unit is more reliant on raw evasion or on just pure defense, then recovery boost is best because it allows you to heal. For skill orbs, it's always difficult to say. I personally, obviously you want to maximize the build you're already doing. So I will seek things like evasion nodes, additional attack nodes. For the bronze slot, I almost always prefer raw stats, if those raw stats are going to help the unit with dealing with normals. So for example, I will give the unit defensive boosts if it helps them with areas they are lacking. For example, I will give it 800 defensive boost to int Alazumasu because it might make him able to handle normals a lot better before he supers. If the defensive boost from the equip is not enough to make them handle normal attacks in the content that you're doing, generally you then just want to rather double down on whatever build you're going for. You can also apply obviously HP, but I apply things like HP and those more to my free-to-play units, as that has less of a direct effect on the unit. If the unit is just realistically amazing at everything, if one day they release a 90% damage reduction, 90% evasion, 90% crit unit because they feel like it, then you can go whatever else. But generally, I use the 3 slots to double down on the build I have. You can, of course, use whatever good equipment you have. Remember, for crit units, you want to go super attack multiplier. For effective against all types units, you want to go attack type multiplier. For guard units, you want to go recovery type guard type boost. For units with high defense or evasion, you'll want to go recovery boost. But generally, double down on your 3 main ones: attack, crit, and evasion. You'll see that's what I'm doing here. Raw stats are only ever something I place when I feel like so for nuking units, I will almost always go raw attack stat. If a unit gains attack type per orb, that raw attack stat adds a ton of a boost and helps you complete nuking events a lot easier. If, for example, it is a unit that I am using for the punching bag event, I will do that. If it is a unit that is struggling with just taking too much chip damage on normals, then very often you will find me go and take that unit and apply defensive boosts to them, because that will help them. Or if they're a unit that builds up over time, sometimes I place a defensive equip on them because it helps them to stack a little bit faster. But honestly, the boost in stacking defense that you gain from defensive equips is not as big as people think. So giving units that stack defense and attack boosts to their raw attack and defense isn't huge. On that, most times players will always give additionals to units that stack attack and defense. This is always standard and is more than fine to do. If a unit has attacks effective against all types, additionals is also fine. If a unit crits, additionals is also fine. Even if the unit's super attack modifier only greatly raises for 1 turn, it's also fine to go additionals. Additionals now more than ever is becoming far more prevalent due to the increase in the crit base of a lot of units. Most units are starting to crit more often. At the same time, if a unit has additionals built into their passive, you're going to want to give them crits, generally speaking, because that's what allows them to maximize their damage. However, if a unit's damage is low, so for nowadays, let's say 5 or 6 million is probably the standard, I would say, of a low super attack, not a high super attack damaging unit, then giving them crit is not super relevant. It doesn't make as big a difference as you'd think, so rather maximize the defensive potential of that unit. Evasion, should you give units evasion? Evasion is fine. I think people read too much into whether they should give units evasion or not. Even giving a unit 3 evasion is the thing. Look, you're welcome to do that. For me, it's not something I do personally a lot, but you can do it. It's fine.